Hey everyone, do not adjust your monitors or whatever you're watching on. It's not Friday, it's Monday. We are here on TrueHoop. Bring it in. Jarod, Hector here with all of you. Coach David Thorpe, how are you, sir?
It's okay, Jarod. Excited to hear from Jesse today, our guest.
Absolutely. And for those of you, Henry is not with us today. He decided to become a BMX X Games racer over the weekend. So I don't know when we'll see him again.
He
Jokes.
should be back tomorrow.
But we are lucky to have Jesse Washington, senior writer at the Undefeated, here with us to talk through a number of things. Obviously, what's going on in the world from an athlete perspective and what he's seeing, but also the NBA larger and a few other things. Jesse, how are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I want to first start with really where, I imagine that nothing that's happening is new or surprising to you, but what are your feelings right now as we're seeing what's happening in the country?
Very hurt, very painful for a number of reasons. I have 4 children. Our youngest are 12. And so to have to introduce them to this, it feels a bit like deja vu because my oldest, who is now 20, was 12 when Trayvon Martin was killed, which was the start of this whole thing. And so, to have to be doing this all over again is tough as a parent. Something does feel different about this particular go-round. I'm not sure exactly what yet. I'm encouraged by the response of more white folks and more institutions to recognize that this is than previously, and who are not staying silent or sitting on the fence. So it's a tough time.
Absolutely. And, you said something interesting. Trayvon Martin is kind of the whole start of this. Like, I know what you meant, but really the whole start of this, right, is we're talking about August of 1619, right? I mean, we're talking about 400 years of this same thing going on over and over. And you are doing something interesting that I want to get into right now, or you just recently finished a book about the legendary Georgetown coach, John Thompson. And he is someone who has always fought for civil rights, for the rights of his players who are predominantly Black. And I'm wondering, in your conversations, I've talked to him for the book, people around that, what are some of the themes in that discussion that were going on then, still happening now, and stuff that we're still fighting today?
Right. Wow. Well, man, it's been such an incredible experience. We are nearing the completion of the book, and we've been working on it for about a year and a half. And so I hesitate to try to, to try to sum up the wisdom of John Thompson, period, in a book, let alone in this conversation. At risk of that. And Coach, if and when you watch this, I hope you don't cut me after this. But I think that there's a lot. The distance. This is a cliche to say that we've come so far, but we have so far to go. But talking to Coach Thompson really makes you just feel that in your bones because of what he's been through and the way he spans different eras. And he is the first one to point out how much things still need to change. And I think that a great measure of, in basketball even, which is probably our most progressive sport that we have in terms of getting off of the plantation and into the big house, as he would say. And so Coach Thompson was, as we know, the first African-American to win a NCAA championship pretty much in any major sport. Howard's soccer team did win a national championship before that, but football, basketball, anything like that. And so he did that in '84. Since then, he is one of 4 Black coaches to win an NCAA basketball championship. The other 3 being Nolan Ryan, Tubby Smith, and Kevin Ollie. Of those 4, Coach Thompson is the only one that was not fired or forced out. So let that sink in for a minute. And today, Black coaches in NCAA basketball have less influence, less voice, less power than they did 10, 20, 30 years ago. So where are we, and why have Black coaches not ascended to the top of this profession? That's a whole nother conversation. So I think that his observations along those lines are really powerful. And Coach Thompson is somebody who always, it's never simple with him. He thinks of things in layer upon layer upon layer. And so this is a man, the last thought I'll leave you with about him is Coach Thompson is from DC and was a great player in DC, played on one of the greatest teams in DC basketball history, which won 55 games in a row. He graduated from Archbishop Carroll High School in 1960. He was one of the top recruits in the country. Had his choice of all of the best schools and chose Providence. He was not recruited by Georgetown in 1960. He knew the coach, he liked the coach likes him, but it was understood that Georgetown did not have any black basketball players at all in 1960. 12 years later, in 1972, he was the coach. So to me, those are two of the things that kind of say, this is, where he grew up in segregation. He was not allowed to attend Georgetown University. 12 years later, he was running the program. And now, almost 50 years later, black coaches are still struggling. That kind of sums it up in our society as a whole and in basketball.
Yeah, Coach Thorpe, I want you to jump in here, but I think, what you're talking about, Jesse, again, I always say sport is just a microcosm of the larger society in which it inhabits, right? So all of the same problems that we're seeing out here in the world are the same problems that exist within sport and within the hierarchical structure. And when we talk about systemic and systematic racism, these are the things that we're discussing, right? Leagues and entities that are, the labor force is predominantly black, yet the people who are making decisions are not, right? And you want to know what is that disconnect, what's going on there. Coach, I know you want to jump in and ask Jesse a question.
Well, I love John Thompson. First of all, when I first started coaching in 83, 87, he was one of my favorite coaches because in 1982, I witnessed the team that knocked us out of the playoffs when I was a high school player. I went to go see their next game, and they got crushed by a team in Plant City, Florida, led by a player named Horace Broadnax.
Oh, man.
Who at that point became the greatest player I've ever seen in my life in person. I was 17 years old at the time. I was a junior in high school. So I followed Horace's career at Georgetown, was a huge Hoyas fan, huge. And then I got to be really friendly with Horace, who went to law school after he was a great player at Georgetown. Then I got to know him because he became a basketball coach too. And he was at Bethune-Cookman for a long time. So I've always been a huge fan. It's always really confused me. The way Coach Thompson ran his program is to me the dream when I coached young players and wanted to send them to a father figure because I couldn't do it anymore. Their families couldn't do it. Why wouldn't you want to send them to someone that would care about them as men, not just basketball players? He was famous for having the deflated basketball in his coaching office, right? Absolutely. As a reminder of, you aren't going to be playing this sport forever. I'm a father of two, boy and girl. I've done this with my son. I still haven't found a place for my daughter because she's not an athlete, to give them to someone like Coach Thompson to take care of our kids. It's their privilege to get to do that. Why haven't more athletic directors understood that families would love to send their son to a coach like that? It's a mystery to me. I'm curious for both you guys, what could possibly keeping athletic directors from understanding the value of that?
Yeah, there's a perfect answer to that. And that's a wonderful sort of, summary that you did of his impact as a human being in that position. And so, first of all, I should probably mention here that the title of the book is I Came as a Shadow. It's coming out in January. So look for that, the autobiography of Coach John Thompson. And Coach Thompson says, I'm trying not to give away everything, but Coach Thompson says, he frequently would get up in front of a group of athletic directors and he would say, listen, yeah, all you guys talk education, but you vote money. And what he meant was, when it's time to make a decision about what the rules should be or what your priorities are, you may say that you're about education, but you make decisions and rules that prioritize money. And so I think that winning is the priority for all these coaches now, because they know they will get fired if they do not win. And then they have to proceed as far as what is going to help me win. And Coach Thompson talks very eloquently and at length about the conflicts that he had in that respect and the safeguards he put in place to protect him against himself. So I think that more athletic directors don't don't care about that because when the basketball team doesn't make the NCAA tournament, nobody asks what the graduation rate is. You know, that's why. If you really want to sum it up.
Yeah.
I think that also we have to talk about some of the things that are going on at the highest levels of college basketball, and who, if you look at some coaches who have been accused and caught up in their and been wiretapped discussing paying players and are still coaching, then this really kind of tells you about the value system that has been in place. It's like this whole environment has been created where winning is the one thing that matters because that keeps the money rolling. It keeps the alumni donations up, enrollment goes up, revenues go up. And so I think that money, and basketball isn't the only thing that money has corrupted. It's got to me a couple of times. I've done a few things for money that I might regret. So I think money is the answer to that question about why we don't have more coaches who prioritize the kid than winning games.
Well, that's the big thing you talk about right there, right? So there is this idea that education, as you said, Jesse, is the most important thing for these universities. But in actuality, we know that's not, right? Because these ADs are being controlled by boosters and big money companies that come in with the money, right? That fancy new $70 million library doesn't come from the annual fund donation, right? When they call you for $25. That's not where that money comes from. And in order for them to continue to have those kinds of dollars come in, you have to let these alumni be in charge. And the thing about these alumni is, and these boosters, they're not just, you know, little rich kid X. It is, oh, they run a bank in the south part of the country, or they run these massive companies, and that money, to your point, talks, and that dictates what goes on. And again, when we're connecting it to what's going on now in the outer world, in the larger world, so much of what we're seeing is a direct result of the economic plight of people, right? And it then causes other issues, which now we move forward and it continues to cause, it exacerbates this system of racism that we have in this country. And I think what's so fascinating about the Georgetown Hoyas to me and Coach Thompson, you remember in the 80s, right? There was this, the whole Hoya paranoia, right? That phrase. And, you know, Georgetown would come and suffocate you with defense and all these things. It had other, right, obviously racial dynamics to it. And we know all the stories around that. And I'm just curious, like, how do you think that the horror paranoia situation and that sort of the way in which Thompson's black players were viewed, how that had an impact on some of them and how they looked at what we're doing in this larger structure, that we're in this larger white power world?
Yeah. So Hoya paranoia. You guys mentioned a couple of really kind of touchstones of his time there. Hoya paranoia, the deflated basketball. Coach Thompson talks about, and will describe in the book, the origin of all those, the people who came up with the term, where he got the deflated basketball, why he wears a towel over his shoulder, all those things. And it's really nice. How did that impact these young men? Deeply, I think in a lot of different ways. I did interview a number of his players about that time. And so obviously they all had their own personal experiences, but Coach Thompson made them acutely aware of what was really going on. He frequently brought everyone says that his practices were just as much them talking about life than it was about how to run a pressure defense or how to run the fast break and then the secondary break. And Coach Thompson told me when he was interviewing me for whether I was going to be the one to write his book, he said, look, this is not a book about how to I set up the press. This is not a book about how to X's and O's. This is more about things that are not basketball. And that is what his coaching was about too. And so these young men, you did not come through Georgetown without being demanded to understand and engage with the world outside of that basketball court. And so, yes, that environment was extremely racialized. This was a big, loud, unapologetic black man who was in your face, coming to your arena and whipping that thing. and if you shoved them, they were shoving you back. And people had never seen that before. And he faced a lot of racism because of that. And Coach Thompson does a great job of really getting into how and when it started, how he felt about that, how he dealt with it. So I'm going to let him tell it instead of me. But rest assured, his main purpose there was to educate these young men and to win some games. And he'll always say that. And the reason why he says, I definitely intended to win because they only listen to you if you win. And that's even today. Let's think about it. LeBron is a champion. He has a platform because he won, And so he's a very complex individual. He has, and in his book, he explores his conflicting feelings. He has the ability, in my observation, which some of our most perceptive people have, to feel two different ways about something at the same time. So he felt that way, sort of like basketball, like, yeah, I'm here to win. And that, but I got to educate these guys, but I got to make sure I win. I mean, people forget this is a man, he won a championship in high school. He won as a high school player. He won the NIT at Providence when that was a national championship. He played for the Celtics for 2 years and won 2 championships backing up Bill Russell. He came to high school and coached his team to a high school championship. And by the way, for my DC people who know Morgan Wooten, the whole Morgan Wooten thing between him and Coach Thompson is good. It's really good. And then he went to Georgetown. This man won championships every single place he was at. So you doggone right he wanted to win. But that was not his main goal. His main goal was education. I mean, it's really I have kids, and my kids are basketball players, 20, 17, and they don't really know who he is. He's not one of the, he wasn't coaching until after they were born. So to all of you guys who know Coach Thompson and know what he was really about, for him to explain that to you, for me to help him explain that to you is very important. And also to introduce him to the next generation and explain who this man was and why they have some of the privileges that they have now. It's a privilege for me to do that.
Coach Thorpe, I know this fits in with your whole edict so well, because you always say, as coaches, our first job is to inspire. So I know what Jesse said about Coach Thompson resonates with you.
There's no question. I mean, listen, I wore a towel over my shoulder when I coached. Initially, I did it because I used to coach at All-Star camps in the summer. Some were outdoors, and the gnats would be around. I'd swing the towel to keep the gnats away. But because Coach Thompson was so iconic, I just copied him. Like, well, he got away with it, and I did it the rest of my career. Whenever I'm the head coach, if I'm volunteering somewhere, I tend to put a towel right over my shoulder. Here's what's really – there's many sad things about what's going on now, but also in college basketball, John Thompson was the iconic figure amongst a few. Dean Smith, and I believe they were very close friends. There were a few very, very iconic figures. He was the only black one that I remember then. Who is it now? Leonard Hamilton is not iconic. He's incredible, beyond incredible. He's doing what John Thompson did in a more quiet way. But he's doing the same thing. He's building men, and the NBA is catching on more and more now. They've got 2 players, a freshman and a sophomore, both ranked like top 16 right now whenever the next draft's going to be. There might be 2 Seminoles in the top 20, as there has been every few years the last few years. Who else is out there? What's the next black coach we have? And what about on the women's side? How is that possible that we have that when 80% or whatever it is of the players are black? These are questions that people need to be asking and getting answers.
And, I think it's still tough for black coaches to make that jump from the assistant to the head chair. It's still tough. And I think, Coach, tremendous point about who are the iconic coaches, who are the coaches who are getting a chance to coach at the marquee programs. How much time are they being given? A fascinating part of the book, and I'm going to, is John Thompson III was a heck of a coach until Virginia won a national championship. Big John and Little John were the only father and son coaches to ever reach the Final Four. So think about that for a minute.
Yeah, amazing.
He's a hell of a coach. And he was fired by Georgetown.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of the book is very poignant. And
There's something, guys, we should consider. Jarod, you mentioned the power of the alumni. So I've been in a meeting with, hearing the story, two different meetings. One was with Archie Griffin, who for many years, besides the two-time Heisman Trophy winner, ran the fundraising for Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
So he told me how that game works, how you get big, rich alumni to put money on, sign that dotted line of checkbook, right? But I also know that many years ago when Florida tried to hire Steve Spurrier, the athletic director, Bill Arnsparger at the time, who was a former great coordinator, defensive coordinator at LSU and Miami Dolphins, he called for a meeting in Tampa, Donatello's restaurant in Tampa. I met with the owner of Donatello's to hear the story. He told me everything. And Arnsparger called in all the rich white dudes that were the big alumni for the school. And he said, I know you want Spurrier. At the time, he was coaching Duke. Then he went to the Bandits. He coached the Bandits too. They have the USFL. He said, pay up. You want Spurrier? Pay up. And they did. The first guy wrote a check for $1 million and said, he was a Tampa businessman, and said, okay, he looked to his peers, who's next? We want Spurrier. Put your money where you're talking about. So if we really want to instigate change and demand it, we've got to demand the people that are writing those checks to stop only looking at white people. That's the bottom line. And start thinking bigger picture. Because quite frankly, these players going to schools need people like John Thompson in their lives. And their families want it. We have to make that happen. And we're selling our athletes short, which we always have. Forget about not paying them. That's ridiculous enough. But we're selling them short by only making it about winning. Because very few of those guys have a chance to play professionally. It's hard to make the NBA. What are we doing for them afterwards? Otherwise, we're no different than Europe, which starts bringing guys in when they're 10 or 11 to turn pro, and they never get an education at all. Very few make it to the top leagues for soccer, and that's a big problem over there, is they're not educated after that, a lot of these players. We're doing the same thing to our athletes here.
Great point.
We're forever in this society, right? We look at the athlete as labor, right? It's this thing where it's like, hey, dance for me, entertain me, do these things. But once that usefulness is used up, I generally don't care about you, right? That is what we're seeing. And I think what's important now is that athletes who have a platform are not taking this stuff lying down, right? They are speaking up and speaking loud. We talked about this on Friday's show. There were sort of a peak and valley of how Black athletes would talk about and use their platforms, right? We had your Muhammad Ali's, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's, Jim Brown's, right? Those guys who would literally risk it all. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I mentioned as well, they would risk everything, right, to stand on a principle. And then we had the OJ-ification of athletes, right, where OJ came out, right, the whole, like, I'm not Black, I'm OJ. And then that led to Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods and Derek Jeter and all these people who just like, listen, man, it's about making these dollars and saying nothing to not offend anyone else. And that's sort of the rise and fall that we've had. But now with guys like LeBron and the different people we have right now, and that's Jesse's great piece about Republicans buying sneakers too. I mean, that you'll never live down that quote, Jordan. That is what it is. It's so fascinating to me, Jesse, and I want you to speak on this because you wrote a piece in the Undefeated talking about, in seeking justice for Ahmaud Arbery, these athletes know the work has just begun. It talks about Malcolm Jenkins, David West, who is coordinating the Professional Collegiate League, Leisha Clarendon, who's in the WNBA. And I want you to talk about your conversation with those athletes and what they feel their responsibility is, not just to each other, but to the larger community, because if not for the grace of God or sport, these individuals, like, this could be me. I could be George Floyd. I could be Trayvon Martin. I could be anybody.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that they feel a deep responsibility, as a lot of, the Black community does, to reach back and help those who are not privileged as we are, and I feel it too. But I think that the unique thing about athletes is that they have successful athletes have I'm going to be about it mentality. I can't talk about it. I have to do the work. And the work required for justice in this country is long. Sometimes you may not see the gains. It has setbacks. It has detours. So those are the athlete analogy is injuries, bad seasons, bad coaches, you might get cut, but the successful athletes keep putting in the work day after day and trusting, if I do this little thing today and I do this little thing day after day after day, I will get there and it will make a difference in my outcome. And so that's really what really struck me about these folks. Malcolm Jenkins, who was the most prominent person who I talked to, and I asked him, I said, do you ever, this is such a huge mountain that we're trying to move here. To dismantle structural racism is a huge task. Do you ever get discouraged? And he said, I see tiny gains every day, and together we can do it. And so for me, that was the big takeaway from these folks. Yes, they have a responsibility, but they're also committed to the long haul, and that's really what it takes. We're discouraged now. We see George Floyd killed, another person killed. And again, the riots that we're having are from the 60s, straight out of the 60s.
Yep.
So it's 50 years later, and it's like, again? But, we have to have faith. We have to be determined. We have to be patient. And all of these and we have to be willing to do the work. And these are all the things that athletes really specialize in. So that's what I tried to get across, because as someone who's been working and writing about these things for a long time, the stories feel the same to me after a while. I don't want to write the same story. There was a headline from a story I wrote 5 years ago. It was called The Ritual. So it's the same ritual that we have. How can we get out of that? I want to give people concrete examples from athletes who are doing this work. This is what you can do. You can actually do something. Support organizations that are on the ground, register to vote, exert pressure on elected officials. These are the type of things that can actually be done. And also, I think that the protests and the participation from a wide swath of society and corporate entities and white allies and concerned citizens of all races, I think that sends a powerful message. And that is something we can do also. To physically show up, to put in the work is important.
100%. And Coach, I know you understand that as someone who works with top-notch athletes, they do have a unique perspective on this, right? Because in order for you to get to the top of your profession, even if it's not the NBA, if you're in the EuroLeague or what have you, you understand what seeing small gains are in your game to make that improvement. And that is the same thing we're talking about if we're trying to push this massive boulder up to the top of this hill. It may roll back on you sometimes, but you can't be like, all right, I'm done, and walk away. We got to get back up and do that. And I'm wondering, as we, again, step out and we look wider and we understand this is about a collective and allies across everywhere. It's not, right? It's, Coach and I had a conversation this weekend. It is about white people also realizing and recognizing, hey, it's not just about, okay, I see this injustice, I don't like it. It's, okay, I have to use my privilege and my power to advocate on behalf. I don't know if you guys saw, there's been videos circulating around, and what a few of the protesters, some of the white protesters who've joined, some of the black protesters have done is, when the cops come out with their guns, like they're ready to shoot, they will run in front of and stand in front of the black protester with their hands up, right? It is that type of thing. You literally have to be like, I'm willing to put something on the line for you if we are going to make this collective thing better. And maybe, I don't know, I'm hoping that this is what we're seeing, that this is finally people have decided, all right, we're done with this, enough, and we're going to have some change. I mean, it's hard not to be cynical about it because, as I said, this has been happening for 400 years, and nothing's changed really in 400 years. So I don't know.
Jesse's point about you think of writing the same story yet and again. I hadn't thought of that from a journalist's point of view. It makes a lot of sense. I'm curious as to why either of you think, as Jesse made a comment about maybe things are changing. I don't disagree. I don't know that I agree either, for the same reasons you guys have said. I do think this is my opinion, I want your opinions. I do think that if indeed there's any kind of change, it's the recognition by white people that there's an institutional issue. This isn't just some bad cops, which, if you want to be grainy, of course it is. If there's 700,000 police persons out there, let's just say 1%, I'm making a number, that's still 7,000 people willing to do damage to unarmed citizens, right, if they're dark skinned. I think it's an institutional issue, and I'm not alone. And I think for a while, people like me have been more singular because I've been dealing with this a long time in my profession and my family, really. But I started to think more people are recognizing, white people are, that we are teaching this institutionally in this business. And by the way, we're not just talking about violence by policemen because of the young man that was killed jogging. Like, I coach athletes. I talked to friends this weekend whose sons are black, and one son is 18, one is 20. And they are fit, they're athletes. They want to go jogging. And there's an argument in their families, guys, as to whether or not one of my kid's godfather, he wants his 20-year-old son home from college because his son wants to go jogging at 4 a.m. when it's not so hot. And the dad's like, fuck it, you're American. Go jogging at 4 a.m. in North Carolina. And the mom isn't so sure. And I get it. That is not an easy answer. The fact they have to have this conversation is what sickens me, and hopefully many others. But do you guys think, why is it you think that maybe, Jesse, there is a little bit difference in the protests now?
Ooh, maybe that little bit of inch by inch work that Malcolm Jenkins was talking about.
Right.
Clearly a part of it is just the utter depravity of the video that we saw with George being killed. The ubiquity of cell phones, these things have been happening. You've seen signs at the protests that the killings aren't new, the cameras are. So the ubiquity of the, footage changes things. With Ahmaud Arbery, those charges came quick after the video came out, and we've seen it time and time again. Video changes things. We live in a world now where people want to see things and not read about it. And I also think that, and I don't want to mangle the quote, but a lot of people from Dr. Martin Luther King began this, and the justice takes a long time. These are like you guys said at the top of the show, 1619, man, to undo all that. I think that people have to think about things differently. And you made a great point, Coach, about people, like, I've never heard the word systemic racism used more than I have just now. And that's a tough concept to understand. And it requires people, and it requires a lot of white folks to accept the fact that they may not be participating in it or even believe it, but you are still upholding it by your silence, by your privilege, and things like that. And so there's much less resistance to those concepts now. So I think that those are some of the reasons. And also I think that, this is a sports show. Athletes have a lot of influence in our society. And as you guys mentioned before, there was a period where the athletes were silent, and Jordan did not say anything during the LA riots. When Rodney King got beaten, there was nothing from him. They did not consider that their place. And because, one of the things that I said in the piece, and I feel that Jordan then built the economic platform so that all these guys now can speak out and still sell sneakers. LeBron has that bag firmly in hand, and he is not going to risk any of his brand if he's speaking out. So I do credit Jordan for that, but these athletes today are much more vocal, and quite honestly, a lot of white folks unconsciously will look at athletes as, oh, well, he's special, he's different. And so they'll receive that message from a LeBron differently than they would from some of our traditional folks who have been activists in the past. And so, I think that today's athletes have done a lot to help raise the level of awareness that has gotten to these differences, Coach, that you see now.
Jesse, and that's a perfect spot right there, because you and I know, and Coach, you know this too, any success that we have in life is not by accident or on our own, right? Like, we stand on the shoulders of people that have come before us. That's how this whole thing works, and how we can keep this process going forward. Jesse, I know that you, obviously being a writer that talks to athletes and you cover sports, you also play a little pickup hoops. I know you're part of a full court tournament. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, man. Thanks. So a couple years back, there's a friend of mine, and Babito Garcia, the legend from NYC. He started this tournament called Full Court 21. And for all my Hooper people out there, I know you've played 21. Well, in this game of 21, if I catch the rebound down here, if I get a turnover or steal down here, I got to go score on the other end. And this tournament is held in cities around the world every summer, all played outside, all around the world, Europe, Asia, Africa. And you just show up and play. You're one person. You don't need any teammates. You show up, you play 1-on-5. And if you're that man or that woman who has what it takes to come out on top and you win the game of 21 that day, then at the end of the summer, everybody from around the world, all the winners, come to Goat Park in New York City, 99th in Amsterdam, and play for the World Championship of Full Court 21. And it's one of the best basketball experiences I've ever had. Awesome. I'm proud to say that I've made it to the championship 4 years. I won Philly 3 years. Then I had to go up to Montreal and take some of that money. And so I went last year. Shout to
What's
my
your
man.
secret? Jesse, what's your secret? I played a lot of 21 growing up. What's your secret?
Oh man, well, the secret is I have a proprietary workout that I do that's really good for the game. You got to be able to hit your free. So if you make it from the field, you got to shoot from the top of the key. You got to be able to hit from the top of the key when you're tired. After you just beat 3 or 4 people and came all the way down, and your heart is racing, your heart is pumping, you got to hit 2 or 3 of them joints from the top of the key every time. That's the key to winning. But also bigger picture, and I'm 50 years old, bigger picture really, and for all my people out there, my athletes and just individuals, it's a daily thing, man. Like we say, you pray every day, eat right, live right, don't smoke, don't drink.
You must be getting some shots up
and then
too.
I'm out here at 50 giving these cats the business.
You must be getting some shots up. If you're making those top of the key outside, you're shooting it.
Yeah, you got to be able to shoot that thing. You got to be able to get some rebounds. You got to be able to beat double teams. I'm not so great at beating double teams, so I try to shoot over you.
50,
I mean,
right?
It's a combo though, right? You got to be sturdy because you got to bang on it to get that rebound, aggressive and stuff, and then come out and be able to stroke that thing.
It's a very physical game, and the court at the GOAT is small.
I'm not in Amsterdam. It's my old neighborhood. Yes.
Oh
sir.
yeah, so you know the deal, man. It's a small court. Go to fullcourt21nyc.com. Go to Babito. Go to Full Court 21 on Instagram or Twitter. Check out the footage. I encourage everybody around the world. If you like what you see, if you think that you're made of that stuff, then hit Babito up. Where's the next tournament? He's trying to do it this summer, maybe not. Definitely next summer. Host your own. Join the worldwide party, man. It's just a basketball movement. I urge everybody to get involved.
Well, thank you, Jesse. We're all here because we love the game of basketball, so we hope that tournament is back sooner rather than later. Guys, that was Jesse Washington, senior writer for the Undefeated. He has a new book coming out in January of 2021 about the legendary Georgetown coach, John Thompson. I Came as a Shadow. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Love you guys.
Be safe, Jesse. Be safe.
Thank you. And that is another episode of Bring It In for TrueHoop.